The shot of a Winchester rifle cracked through the thin morning air, jerking Nora Hayes awake on the hard dirt floor where she'd spent another restless night. She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding against her ribs as heavy footsteps approached the small back room of the Hayes family's dilapidated cabin on the outskirts of Truckee, California. "Get yourself decent, girl," her father's gruff voice commanded through the threadbare curtain that served as her only privacy. "Got company coming." Nora smoothed her calloused hands over her faded cotton dress, the only one she owned that wasn't completely worn through. At 21, she'd spent most of her life caring for her 3 younger siblings after their mother passed from fever 5 winters ago. Her father, Jeremiah Hayes, had turned to the bottle shortly after, leaving the burden of their survival largely on Nora's thin shoulders. The year was 1875, and the mining boom that had once made Truckee a promising settlement along the Central Pacific Railroad had begun to wane. The Hayes family, never prosperous to begin with, had sunk further into poverty with each passing season. "Coming, Pa," she called back, quickly braiding her long chestnut hair and pinching her cheeks for color. Whatever visitor had prompted her father to wake her so abruptly, she knew better than to keep them waiting. When she emerged into the main room of the cabin, she found her father standing with a stranger, a tall man in a weather-worn duster and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded piercing blue eyes. His stance was casual but confident, one thumb hooked in his belt near a well-maintained Colt revolver. "This here's Preston Forrester," her father announced, with a peculiar gleam in his bloodshot eyes. "Passing through from Montana Territory, cattleman." "Madam," the stranger nodded politely, removing his hat to reveal dark blonde hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He appeared to be in his late 20s, his tanned face bearing the telltale creases of a man who spent most of his days under the open sky. Nora dipped her head in acknowledgement, aware of the tension in the room and the inexplicable way her father's gaze kept darting between her and the bottle of whiskey sitting on the rough-hewn table. "Mr. Forrester's offered us a mighty fine opportunity," her father continued, his words slightly slurred despite the early hour. "3 bottles of Dickel's finest for your hand." The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning registered fully in Nora's mind. Her body went cold, then hot with shame and anger. "You're selling me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Now, don't you go putting it like that," her father snapped. "I'm securing your future. Mr. Forrester here's got a fine ranch up north. You'll have food, shelter. I'm not a horse to be traded, Pa." Nora's voice rose, her hands balling into fists at her sides. Preston Forrester cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "Miss Hayes, if I may." His voice was deep but gentle, with none of the harshness she'd expected. "Your father approached me at the saloon last night with this proposition. I declined." Her father's face darkened. "Now wait just a minute, but," Preston continued, "when he insisted and I realized the gravity of your situation, I thought I might offer an alternative." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather pouch, which he tossed onto the table with a heavy clink. "3 bottles of whiskey is what you asked for, Mr. Hayes. I've brought you the equivalent in gold, triple what those bottles would cost." Jeremiah Hayes's eyes widened at the sight of the gold pieces. "The money is yours," Preston said firmly. "But I want to be clear, I'm not buying Miss Hayes. No person should be bought or sold. What I am proposing is to offer her a position of employment on my ranch near Virginia City, Nevada. As a housekeeper, with fair wages, her own quarters, and my word as a gentleman that she'll be treated with respect." Nora stared at the stranger, trying to read his intentions behind those steady blue eyes. "Why would you do this?" she asked suspiciously. A faint smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Because, Miss Hayes, people aren't commodities to be bartered, especially not for whiskey." He turned back to her father. "The gold is yours regardless of her decision, but I hope she'll consider my offer." Jeremiah snatched up the pouch, already calculating how many bottles it would buy. "She'll go," he declared. "Pa," Nora protested. "It's that or starve here with us," her father growled. Your brothers and sister need that money for food. Don't you go thinking you're too good to work for your family's survival." Nora looked around the cabin at the empty cupboards, her siblings' threadbare clothes, and her father's trembling hands that hadn't done an honest day's work in years. Then she looked at Preston Forrester, standing tall and patient, offering something that felt dangerously like hope. "When would we leave?" she asked quietly. "My business in town concludes tomorrow. We could depart at first light the day after," Preston replied. "You have my word that if at any point you're uncomfortable, I'll arrange safe passage back here or to any town of your choosing." Nora nodded slowly. "I'll need to say goodbye to my siblings and pack my things. Of course." Her father was already heading for the door, gold in hand, no doubt bound for the nearest saloon. Preston stepped aside to let him pass, then turned back to Nora. "Miss Hayes," he said softly, "I want you to understand something. To me, your worth isn't measured in whiskey bottles or gold pieces. I believe every person is priceless, deserving of dignity and respect. I hope to prove that to you in time." With those words, he placed his hat back on his head, tipped it slightly, and stepped out into the morning sun, leaving Nora to wonder if she'd just made a terrible mistake or found an unexpected salvation. 2 days later, as dawn painted the Sierra Nevada mountains in hues of pink and gold, Nora stood outside the Truckee stagecoach station with a small cloth bundle containing her meager possessions. Her little sister, Emma, clung to her skirts, crying softly, while her brothers Jacob and Thomas stood stoically nearby, trying to hide their own distress. "You write to us, you hear?" Jacob, the eldest at 15, demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "Let us know you're safe." "I promise," Nora said, kneeling to embrace them all one last time. Her father had not returned to the cabin since taking Preston's gold, and Nora had left what little food she could gather for her siblings, along with instructions for Jacob on how to manage until she could send money. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the road, where Preston approached on a magnificent chestnut stallion, leading a smaller, gentle-looking mare. He dismounted gracefully, nodding to the children. "Miss Hayes," he greeted Nora, then smiled at the children. "You must be Emma, Jacob, and Thomas. Your sister has told me about you." Jacob stepped forward protectively. "You'd better treat her right, mister." A flash of respect crossed Preston's features. "You have my word, young man. Your sister will be accorded every courtesy." He turned to Nora. "I've secured a mount for you. I hope you don't mind riding rather than taking the stage. It gives us more flexibility in our journey." Nora eyed the mare uncertainly. "I've never ridden before. Daisy is gentle as a lamb. I'll be beside you the whole way and we'll take it slow." After a final round of tearful goodbyes, Preston helped Nora mount the mare, showing her how to hold the reins and sit properly in the saddle. Her dress hiked up slightly above her ankles, making her blush, but Preston maintained a respectful demeanor, focusing only on ensuring she was secure. "Ready?" he asked, mounting his own horse. Nora looked back at her siblings, at the town that had been the only home she'd ever known, and then toward the open road ahead. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I'm ready." They rode east toward the Nevada border, keeping a steady but comfortable pace. Preston proved to be a patient teacher, instructing Nora on basic horsemanship while maintaining a respectful distance. By midday, she had gained enough confidence to appreciate the beautiful landscape around them as they descended from the mountains toward the high desert. "How far is your ranch from Virginia City?" Nora asked during a brief rest to water the horses. "About 15 miles north," Preston replied, passing her a canteen. "It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's good land with a year-round creek. I run about 500 head of cattle and keep a small stable of horses." "And you manage it alone?" "No, I have 4 ranch hands, good men who have been with me for years. And Mrs. Abernathy, who comes from town 3 days a week to cook and clean. She's getting on in years, though, which is partly why I'm looking for a full-time housekeeper." Nora sipped the water, studying him over the rim of the canteen. "Is that truly all you expect of me, Mr. Forrester?" To keep house. Preston's expression grew serious. Miss Hayes, I understand your caution. A woman in your position has every right to be suspicious of a man's intentions. But yes, I'm offering you honest employment, nothing more. You'll have your own quarters, fair wages, and my complete respect. Something in his straightforward manner eased a fraction of her worry. They remounted and continued their journey, crossing into Nevada territory by late afternoon. As the sun began its descent, Preston guided them toward a small inn at a crossroads settlement. We'll stop here for the night, he explained. It's modest but clean. You'll have your own room, of course. Nora's face flushed. I don't have money for lodgings. Your accommodations are covered by me as your employer, Preston said simply. Consider it an advance on your wages. The innkeeper's wife, a plump, cheerful woman named Mrs. Sullivan, showed Nora to a small but clean room with an actual bed, a luxury she hadn't enjoyed in years. After a simple but filling supper taken in the common room, Nora excused herself early, exhausted from the day's travel. In the privacy of her room, she finally allowed herself to contemplate her situation fully. She had left everything she knew to follow a stranger on nothing more than his word, and a sense that anything, even the unknown, was better than being bartered for whiskey by her own father. Lord help me, she whispered into the darkness. I hope I've made the right choice. The journey to Preston's ranch took 3 days, during which Nora learned more about her new employer. Born in Pennsylvania, he had come west after the war between the states, working cattle drives before saving enough to purchase his own land 5 years ago. He spoke little of his family back east, but his knowledge of literature and occasional references to Shakespeare suggested he'd had more formal education than most men of the frontier. By the time they crested a hill overlooking a verdant valley with a substantial log house, a barn, and several outbuildings nestled beside a creek, Nora had developed a grudging respect for the cattleman. He had been unfailingly polite, patient with her inexperience on horseback, and had kept a proper distance at all times. There it is, Preston said, a note of pride in his voice. Forrester Ranch. As they approached, 2 men emerged from the barn, and an older woman appeared in the doorway of the main house, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. That's Mrs. Abernathy, Preston explained. And 2 of my hands, Miguel Reyes and John Blackwater. John's half Paiute, best tracker in the territory. The other boys must be out with the herd. Nora smoothed her travel-worn dress nervously as they rode into the yard. Preston dismounted first, then came to help her down from Daisy. Her legs felt wobbly after so many hours in the saddle, and she stumbled slightly, her hand automatically gripping his forearm for balance. Steady, he murmured, his hands respectfully at her waist just long enough to ensure she was stable before stepping back. Mr. Forrester. About time you returned, Mrs. Abernathy called, bustling forward. She was a stout woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and keen eyes that assessed Nora quickly. And you must be Miss Hayes. Welcome to our little corner of creation. Thank you, madam, Nora replied shyly. Mrs. Abernathy, would you show Miss Hayes to the housekeeper's quarters and help her get settled? Preston asked. I'm sure she'd appreciate a chance to rest and freshen up after our journey. Of course. Come along, dear. The room's all prepared small but comfortable, with its own entrance off the kitchen. You'll have privacy but still be close enough if you're needed in the house. Nora followed the older woman, casting one glance back at Preston, who was already deep in conversation with his ranch hands. The main house was larger than it had appeared from a distance, a substantial 2-story structure built of hand-hewn logs with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Inside, Nora was surprised by the comfortable furnishings, well-crafted bookshelves filled with volumes, and general air of civilized domesticity. The housekeeper's quarters proved to be a snug room adjacent to the kitchen, with its own small window overlooking a kitchen garden, a narrow but comfortable-looking bed, a washstand, and a simple dresser. Mr. Forrester had this built special for the housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy explained. Said a woman deserves her privacy and a place to call her own. Previous girl left to get married last fall. He was good enough to keep me on part-time until he found someone permanent. She paused, studying Nora. He didn't mention how young you are. Nora lifted her chin. I'm 21, Mrs. Abernathy, and I've been keeping house since I was 12. The older woman's expression softened. I didn't mean anything by it, dear. Just surprised is all. Mr. Forrester's a proper gentleman, not like some ranchers who'd hire a pretty young thing for. Well, never mind that. He'll treat you fair. She patted Nora's arm. Now there's water heating on the stove if you'd like to wash up. Supper's in 2 hours. Left alone, Nora unpacked her few belongings, washed the trail dust from her face and hands, and changed into her second dress, nearly as worn as the first, but at least clean. She was brushing her long hair when a knock came at her door. Miss Hayes, Preston's voice called. When you're settled, I'd like to discuss your duties and wages if that's convenient. Just a moment, she called back, quickly braiding her hair and pinning it up. She found him waiting in the kitchen, hat in hands, looking slightly ill at ease in his own home. Please sit, he gestured to the large wooden table that dominated the room. Mrs. Abernathy's gone to gather eggs, so we can speak privately. Once they were seated, he cleared his throat. I want to be clear about what I expect. Your duties would include keeping the main house clean, helping with meals when Mrs. Abernathy isn't here, mending, laundry, and generally maintaining the household. You'd have Sundays off, of course, and I can arrange transportation to town for church if you wish. Nora nodded, finding these terms reasonable. As for wages, he continued, I'm offering $20 a month plus room and board. I'll advance you 3 months' wages today so you can purchase anything you need and send something to your siblings if you wish. Nora couldn't hide her shock. $20 was far more than she'd expected, more than most ranch hands made. That's very generous, she managed. A slight smile touched Preston's lips. It's a fair wage for important work, Miss Hayes. I value a well-kept home. He reached into his pocket and counted out $60, placing it on the table. Your first 3 months, as promised. Nora stared at the money more than she'd ever possessed at once. Thank you, she whispered. One more thing, Preston added, his expression growing serious. I want you to understand that your employment here is genuine. You're free to leave at any time if you're dissatisfied. I'm not your owner, Miss Hayes. I'm your employer. There's a difference. With that, he stood, nodded politely, and left her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the money that represented something she'd rarely experienced in her life. Choices. The following weeks brought Nora into a routine that, while demanding, felt almost luxurious compared to her previous existence. She rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for Preston and the ranch hands, spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the main house, afternoons on laundry or mending, and evenings preparing for the next day. Preston was often out from sunrise until dusk, working with his cattle or horses, occasionally making trips to Virginia City for supplies or business. When their paths crossed, he was unfailingly polite, but maintained a certain distance that Nora found both reassuring and, increasingly, a little disappointing. She learned more about him through small details, the books he read in the evenings by lamplight, histories, poetry, and practical manuals on animal husbandry. The care he took to clean his boots before entering the house, the way he always thanked her for meals with genuine appreciation. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Nora was setting the table for supper when Preston came in from the barn, his expression troubled. Is everything all right, Mr. Forrester? She asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. He sighed, removing his hat. One of the new calves is sick. I'm worried we might lose her. Without thinking, Nora said, my mother knew remedies for livestock. I might be able to help. Preston looked surprised but nodded. I'd appreciate any suggestions. After supper, Nora accompanied him to the barn, where a small calf lay listless in a bed of straw, its breathing labored. Looks like milk fever, she said after examining the animal. Do you have any molasses and warm water?" Preston raised an eyebrow but sent one of the hands to fetch the ingredients. Under Nora's direction, they mixed a solution and carefully administered it to the calf. "Now we wait," she said, settling on a hay bale. "Someone should stay with her through the night." "I'll do it," Preston offered. "We could take turns," Nora suggested. "There's no sense in you losing a full night's sleep when I could help." Preston studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That's kind of you, Miss Hayes." They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell fully outside. Finally, Preston spoke. "Where did you learn about treating livestock?" Nora smiled slightly. "My mother came from a farming family in Ohio. She brought her knowledge west when she married Pa. She taught me everything she could before." She trailed off. "Before she passed," Preston guessed gently. Nora nodded. "5 years ago. Fever took her in just 3 days. That's when Pa started drinking heavily. He'd always enjoyed his whiskey, but after Ma died, it became everything to him." Preston was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry about your mother, and I'm sorry about the circumstances that brought you here." "Are you?" Nora asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "If my father hadn't been willing to trade me for whiskey, you'd never have offered me this position." "True," Preston admitted. "But I'd like to think our paths might have crossed anyway, maybe in town or at a social. Though I'll admit I don't attend many of those." "Why not? Surely an established rancher like yourself would be welcome." A shadow crossed his features. "I keep to myself mostly. Find it simpler that way." Before Nora could inquire further, the calf stirred, attempting to stand on wobbly legs. "Well, would you look at that?" Preston said, his face breaking into a genuine smile that transformed his features, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Your remedy seems to be working, Miss Hayes." "She's not out of danger yet," Nora cautioned, but she couldn't help returning his smile. They ended up sharing the night watch, taking turns dozing on hay bales while monitoring the calf. By morning, the little animal was standing and attempting to nurse, weak, but clearly improving. "You've saved us a valuable calf," Preston told Nora as they walked back to the house in the pink light of dawn. "I'm grateful for your knowledge." "I'm happy I could help," she replied honestly. As they reached the porch, Preston paused. "Miss Hayes, Nora, if I may, I realize I've been perhaps too formal since your arrival. I wanted to ensure you felt safe and respected, but I fear I may have seemed cold. That wasn't my intention." Nora looked up at him, noting the sincerity in his blue eyes, the way the early light caught in his hair. "You've been nothing but kind, Mr. Forrester. Preston, please, at least when it's just us." Something warm unfurled in Nora's chest. "Preston," she echoed softly. From that morning, a subtle shift occurred in their relationship. Preston began taking more meals at the house rather than with the hands in the bunkhouse. In the evenings, he sometimes invited Nora to join him in the small sitting room, where they discussed books or he shared news from town. He began asking her opinion on matters related to the household, and occasionally even ranch business. Nora found herself looking forward to these moments, to the sound of his boots on the porch in the evening, to the way he would sometimes pause in the doorway to watch her work, a thoughtful expression on his face. 2 months after her arrival, Preston announced at breakfast that he needed to make a trip to Virginia City. "Would you like to come along?" he asked Nora. "You mentioned needing fabric for new curtains, and I'm sure there are other supplies you could use. Besides, you haven't had a proper day off since you arrived." Surprised and pleased by the invitation, Nora quickly agreed. The next morning they set out in Preston's wagon, the journey to town taking just over an hour. Virginia City was a bustling mining town, with false-fronted buildings lining C Street and the constant activity of the Comstock-Lode silver mines visible on the hillsides. Nora, who had rarely left Truckee before, stared wide-eyed at the Grand International Hotel, the ornate opera house, and the well-dressed ladies promenading along the boardwalks. "It's so civilized," she marveled. Preston smiled. "Virginia City likes to think of itself as the Paris of the West. Though I suspect actual Parisians might disagree." He escorted her to the Mercantile, where she selected fabric for curtains and some sturdy cotton for herself. When she hesitated over the price of a bolt of pretty blue calico, Preston quietly added it to their purchases. "Consider it a thank you for saving the calf," he said when she protested. "That fabric will suit your eyes." The casual compliment brought warmth to Nora's cheeks. After completing their shopping, Preston suggested lunch at a small cafe that served proper ladies as well as gentlemen. "I have some business at the assayer's office afterward," he explained, "but it shouldn't take long." Over a meal that was simple but far more refined than what they typically ate at the ranch, Nora found herself relaxing in Preston's company. He told her stories of his early days in the territory, and she shared memories of her mother's cooking and her siblings' antics. "You miss them," Preston observed when she spoke of Emma, Jacob, and Thomas. "Every day," Nora admitted. "I've sent money twice now, but I worry about them. Jacob's a good boy, but he's only 15 and Pa." She trailed off, not wanting to speak ill of her father. Preston was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "If you'd like to visit them or bring them to the ranch for a time, that could be arranged." Nora looked up in surprise. "You do that, of course. Family is important, and there's plenty of room at the ranch." The generosity of the offer touched her deeply. "Thank you, perhaps when winter comes if they're able." After lunch, Preston excused himself to conduct his business, arranging to meet Nora at the wagon in an hour. She used the time to explore the shops along C Street, pausing outside a dressmaker's window to admire a simple but elegant blue dress with lace trim. "You'd look mighty fine in that," came a slurred voice from behind her. Nora turned to find a well-dressed but clearly intoxicated man leering at her. She moved to step around him, but he blocked her path. "Now don't be unfriendly, pretty thing. Let me buy you that dress. Then maybe you can show me how grateful you are." He reached for her arm. "Please step aside, sir," Nora said firmly, trying to mask her fear. "I believe the lady asked you to move," came Preston's cold voice as he materialized beside Nora, his hand moving casually to rest near his holstered revolver. The drunk's bloodshot eyes widened slightly. "No offense meant, mister, just being friendly. Your kind of friendly isn't welcome. Move along." Something in Preston's tone, a quiet steel that Nora had never heard before, convinced the man to shuffle away, muttering under his breath. "Are you all right?" Preston asked, his expression concerned. Nora nodded, embarrassed. "I'm fine. Thank you for stepping in." "No need for thanks." "That kind of behavior is inexcusable." He offered his arm. "Shall we head back to the ranch?" As they drove home, Nora noticed Preston was unusually quiet, his jaw set in a tense line. "Is something troubling you?" she finally asked. He sighed. "I don't like that you were made uncomfortable in town. Perhaps I shouldn't have left you alone." "You can't escort me every minute," Nora pointed out reasonably. "And I'm not completely helpless. I grew up with a father who was often drunk and belligerent. I know how to handle myself." Preston's hands tightened on the reins. "The fact that you had to learn that skill at all." He shook his head. "It angers me, Nora. The way your father treated you, the way that man just now thought he could treat you." His vehemence surprised her. "Why does it matter so much to you?" He was quiet for so long that Nora thought he might not answer. Finally, he said softly, "Because I've seen what happens when men treat women as property or objects. My own sister." He trailed off, his expression darkening further. "Your sister?" Nora prompted gently. "She married a man who seemed respectable, a businessman from a good family, but behind closed doors, he treated her like something he owned. By the time I discovered what was happening, she was." He swallowed hard. "She took her own life rather than endure another day with him." "Oh, Preston," Nora breathed, "I'm so sorry. It was 5 years ago. I confronted him afterward and things didn't end well. That's part of why I came west, to start fresh." He glanced at her. "When I saw your father trying to trade you for whiskey, all I could think was that I couldn't stand by and let another woman be treated that way. Not if I could prevent it." The revelation settled over Nora like a blanket, both warming and weighty. Preston's kindness, his insistence on treating her with respect, His generous wages that ensured her independence all stemmed from this deep wound in his past. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "And thank you for what you did that day in Truckee. Not just paying triple for me, but for seeing me as priceless." Preston's eyes met hers briefly, something unreadable flickering in their depths. "You are, Nora. Never doubt that." The rest of the journey passed in companionable silence, but something had shifted between them, a new understanding, a deepening of trust that made Nora's heart beat a little faster whenever Preston's hand accidentally brushed hers as he helped her down from the wagon at home. Home. The realization that she now thought of the ranch as home caught her by surprise. Summer stretched into early fall, bringing with it cattle roundups that kept Preston and his hands busy from dawn until dusk. Nora took on additional responsibilities, preparing extra meals to be taken out to the men, and occasionally riding out herself to deliver fresh water and supplies. On one such afternoon, she found Preston separating calves from the herd, his expertise on horseback evident as he guided his mount with subtle shifts of weight and pressure from his knees, barely touching the reins. "You're quite the horseman," she called as she approached with a canteen of fresh water. He looked up, a rare grin splitting his tanned face. "And you've become quite the horsewoman yourself, Miss Hayes. A far cry from that first day on the trail from Truckee." Nora laughed, remembering her nervousness. "Daisy deserves most of the credit. She's a patient teacher." She dismounted, handing him the canteen. Their fingers brushed, and Nora felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. Preston took a long drink, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Thank you for riding out. The men appreciate the fresh water and the company of a pretty face, I'm sure." Nora felt herself blushing. "I don't mind. It's a beautiful day to be outside." Preston studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "You look at home out here. Like you belong on the range." "I feel at home," she admitted. "More than I ever did in Truckee." Something passed between them, then a moment of recognition, of shared understanding that hung in the air like a promise. But before either could speak further, one of the hands called for Preston's assistance with a stubborn steer. "Duty calls," he said reluctantly. "Will I see you at supper?" "I'll have it waiting," Nora promised. That evening, after the men had eaten their fill and retired to the bunkhouse, Nora was wiping down the kitchen table when Preston returned from checking the horses. "Everything settled for the night?" she asked. "All quiet," he confirmed, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. Instead of retiring to his room as usual, he lingered, watching her work. "Nora, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you," her hands stilled on the cloth. "Oh, your position here. Your arrangement." He seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "You've been with us nearly 4 months now. Are you content?" The question surprised her. "Of course, you've been more than fair as an employer." "That's not quite what I'm asking." Preston ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Nora had come to recognize as a sign of inner turmoil. "I'm asking if you're happy here, if you'd want to stay long-term." "I have no plans to leave if that's what concerns you." "It's not that exactly." He took a deep breath. "Nora, I find myself in a difficult position. When I brought you here, I made it clear that I was offering employment, nothing more. I wanted you to feel safe, to know that I respected you as a person, not a commodity." Nora's heart began to race. "Yes, but these past months, working alongside you, getting to know you, my feelings have changed, deepened." He met her eyes directly. "I find myself thinking of you as much more than my housekeeper." The admission hung in the air between them. Nora's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying, Preston?" she asked softly. He moved closer slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away. "I'm saying that I care for you, Nora Hayes, more than I thought possible, but I would never want you to feel obligated or pressured because of our arrangement. Your position here is secure regardless of your response." Nora studied his face, the earnestness in his blue eyes, the tension in his jaw as he awaited her reaction. In that moment, she knew her own heart with sudden clarity. "I care for you too," she whispered. "I have for some time now." Relief and joy transformed Preston's features. Tentatively, he reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "May I court you properly, Nora, not as your employer but as a man who admires everything about you, your strength, your kindness, your determination." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "I'd like that very much." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Thank you," he murmured, "for giving me the chance to earn your trust, and perhaps, someday, your love." The autumn days grew shorter. The nights cooler, and Preston's courtship of Nora progressed with the same respectful care that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. They took rides together on Sundays after church, shared books and conversations in the evenings, and occasionally traveled to Virginia City for dinner or to attend a performance at Piper's Opera House. To maintain propriety, Preston insisted on paying Nora's full wages as before, and she continued her duties as housekeeper, though he often stepped in to help with heavier tasks. The ranch hands pretended not to notice the change in their relationship, though Miguel sometimes winked at Nora when Preston held her hand or offered his arm on the way to church. As October gave way to November, Preston began to speak more openly of the future. "I've been thinking," he said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, "about your siblings in Truckee, winters coming on fast in the high Sierras." Nora nodded, worry creasing her brow. "I've been sending money, but I haven't had word from them in almost a month. Last I heard, Pa was talking about moving them to Sacramento to look for work." Preston covered her hand with his. "What would you think about me riding to Truckee to check on them? I could bring them back here for the winter if they are in need." Nora turned to him, eyes wide. "You do that, of course. They're your family, which makes them important to me." Impulsively, Nora leaned over and pressed a kiss to his cheek. "Thank you. I've been so worried, especially about little Emma." Preston's eyes darkened slightly at her kiss. "Then it's settled. I'll leave tomorrow." 5 days later, Nora was kneading bread dough when the sound of hoofbeats and wagon wheels made her rush to the window. Her heart leapt at the sight of Preston driving a wagon into the yard, 3 small figures huddled beside him. "Emma, Jacob, Thomas," she cried, running outside, flour-covered hands forgotten. The children tumbled from the wagon into her arms, all talking at once. Emma, now 11, was crying and laughing simultaneously. Jacob looked thinner than Nora remembered but stood tall with newfound maturity. Thomas, at 13, grinned through a layer of travel dust. "You've all grown so much," Nora marveled, hugging them fiercely. "Mr. Forrester came just in time," Jacob said soberly. "Pa had sold most everything, even Ma's locket. We were fixing to head to Sacramento with him, but—" He glanced at Preston, who was unloading bags from the wagon. "Your father agreed it would be better for the children to spend the winter here," Preston explained diplomatically. "We left him with enough money for his journey south." The look that passed between him and Jacob told Nora there was more to the story, but she didn't press in front of the younger children. "Come inside, all of you," she urged. "There's hot stew on the stove, and I was just baking bread." Later that night, after the children had been settled in spare rooms, Nora found Preston in the sitting room staring thoughtfully into the fire. "Tell me what really happened," she said quietly, sitting beside him. Preston sighed. "Your father was in rough shape, Nora. The cabin had been stripped nearly bare. I suspect he sold everything of value for drink. The children were surviving mostly on Jacob's hunting and odd jobs he'd taken in town." Anger and sadness warred in Nora's heart. "And Pa just agreed to let them come with you." "Not exactly." Preston's jaw tightened. "He demanded payment, said I'd taken 1 haze, might as well take the rest. I paid him what he asked, not for the children, but to ensure he wouldn't cause trouble later." "How much?" Nora asked, her voice barely audible. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that your siblings are safe now." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "You've saved us all, Preston. First me, now them. How can I ever repay such kindness?" Preston turned to her, taking her hands in his. "You owe me nothing, Nora, don't you understand? Every moment with you is a gift. Seeing your smile, hearing your voice, watching you with your siblings, these are worth more than gold to me." In that moment, looking into his earnest blue eyes, Nora recognized the feeling that had been growing in her heart for months. "I love you," she whispered. Preston's breath caught. Slowly, reverently, he reached up to touch her cheek. "And I love you, Nora Hayes, with all that I am." Their first real kiss was gentle, a tender press of lips that deepened gradually as Nora's arms wound around Preston's neck and his hands came to rest respectfully at her waist. When they finally parted, both were smiling. "I had planned to wait until Christmas," Preston said, reaching into his pocket, "but I don't think I can wait another day." He withdrew a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a simple but elegant gold ring with a single diamond. "Nora Hayes, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Not because I purchased your freedom or brought your siblings here, but because I love you and cannot imagine my life without you by my side." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, Preston Forrester. Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 2 weeks before Christmas in Virginia City's small Episcopal church, with Nora's siblings, the ranch hands, and a few townspeople in attendance. Nora wore a dress of the blue calico Preston had purchased months earlier, now transformed by Mrs. Abernathy's skilled hands into a stylish wedding gown, with lace trim reminiscent of the one Nora had admired in the dressmaker's window. Preston couldn't take his eyes off his bride as she walked down the aisle on Jacob's arm, her face radiant with happiness. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston's kiss was tender but held a promise of the passion they would finally be free to express. The wedding supper at the ranch was a joyful affair, with Miguel playing guitar while John Blackwater revealed a surprisingly fine singing voice. Even Mrs. Abernathy danced a reel with Thomas, her usual stern demeanor softened by the occasion. As the celebration continued, Preston drew Nora outside to the porch, where the winter stars shone like diamonds against the velvet sky. "Happy, Mrs. Forrester?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist from behind. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered honestly, leaning back against his solid warmth. "If someone had told me a year ago that being sold for a bottle of whiskey would lead to this much joy, I'd have called them crazy." Preston turned her gently to face him. "You were never sold, Nora, not to me. I may have paid your father, but it was never about buying you. It was about giving you the freedom to choose your own path." "And I chose you," she said softly, reaching up to trace his jawline. "I will always choose you." His kiss was deeper this time, hinting at the night to come. When they finally broke apart breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "You know," he murmured, "I've been thinking about expanding the ranch. The Harrington property to the north is for sale, good grazing land with a larger house. Room for a growing family, perhaps." Nora smiled up at him. "I'd like that very much." 2 years later, Preston stood on the porch of their new home, watching as Nora rocked their infant son, Samuel, while keeping an eye on Emma and Thomas playing a game of chase in the front yard. Jacob, now 17 and Preston's right-hand man on the ranch, was working with the horses in the corral nearby. The Harrington property had proven to be an excellent investment. The larger house accommodated their blended family comfortably, and the additional land had allowed Preston to increase his herd substantially. With Jacob's help and Nora's smart management of the household accounts, Forrester Ranch was becoming one of the most prosperous in the territory. Nora looked up, catching Preston's eye, and smiled that smile that still made his heart race. She rose carefully with Samuel and joined him on the porch. "Penny for your thoughts, husband," she said, leaning against him as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Just counting my blessings," he replied honestly, "and thinking about how sometimes the most precious things in life come from the most unlikely beginnings." Nora nodded, understanding his reference to their unusual first meeting. "Do you ever regret it?" "Paying triple for a stranger that day in Truckee?" Preston looked down at her, at their son sleeping peacefully in her arms, at the home and family they had built together. "Not for a single moment. Best investment I ever made." Nora laughed softly. Because I've been a good housekeeper. Because you've been exactly who you are: strong, loving, determined, the perfect partner for this life. He kissed her temple. Worth far more than all the gold in the Comstock lode. Even when I burned the biscuits, she teased, even then. Samuel stirred in his mother's arms, blinking up at them with eyes as blue as his father's. Preston gently stroked his son's cheek with one finger, marveling at the perfect miniature features. I received a letter from Virginia City yesterday, Nora said after a moment. From the school board. They've approved my proposal for a small school here in the valley. I can start teaching after the spring roundup. Preston beamed with pride. Nora had been studying with books he ordered from San Francisco, preparing herself to offer education to the ranch children and others from neighboring properties. That's wonderful news, love. You'll be an excellent teacher. It feels right, she admitted. Helping other children have opportunities I nearly missed. She looked up at him. None of this would have been possible without you, Preston. You give me too much credit. The strength was always in you, Nora. I just helped clear the path a bit. As the sun began to set over the Nevada mountains, painting the valley in gold and purple, Preston thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. A desperate father willing to sell his daughter for whiskey. A man haunted by his sister's fate, determined not to let another woman suffer a similar destiny. And in between, a remarkable woman whose worth could never be measured in bottles or coins. What do you think the future holds for us? Nora asked softly, following his gaze to the spectacular sunset. Preston tightened his arm around her shoulders. More of this, I hope. More children, if you're willing. Watching the ones we have grow up strong and good, building something lasting together. That sounds perfect, Nora agreed. Later that night, with Samuel sleeping peacefully in his cradle and the rest of the household quiet, Preston held his wife close in their bed, marveling at how completely she had transformed his once solitary life. I love you, Nora Forrester, he whispered against her hair. More with each passing day. And I love you, she answered, nestling closer. My rescuer, my friend, my heart. Preston smiled in the darkness. Not your rescuer, he corrected gently. Just a man fortunate enough to recognize a priceless treasure when he saw one. In the years that followed, the story of how they met became a family legend told and retold. Sometimes with laughter, sometimes with tears, but always with a sense of wonder at how the darkest moments can sometimes lead to the brightest futures. The Hayes siblings grew into capable, confident adults under Preston and Nora's guidance. The ranch prospered, as did Nora's small school, which eventually grew into a proper schoolhouse with 24 students. And through it all, Preston and Nora remained deeply in love, partners in all things, proving that sometimes the most valuable things in life cannot be bought at any price. They can only be recognized, cherished, and treasured for the priceless gifts they truly are.